The death track loomed like a quantum nightmare, a planet-sized gauntlet of spatial and temporal hazards that defied normal physics. From orbit, it resembled a writhing mass of probability storms, corridors of bent light, and nodes of compressed time, all engineered for the singular purpose of finding the one being in the universe who could survive its challenges. Jax Corbin stared through the viewport of his pod. The scuffed metal hull, bearing the scars of 100 rescue missions through asteroid fields and collapsing space stations. Now stripped of most safety features, the vessel had been modified for one purpose: to enter the death track and survive. Or not. Jax wasn't particularly concerned either way. Stabilizers at nominal capacity. His onboard AI chirped, its voice purposefully cheery to counterbalance his perpetual scowl. "Dial it down," Jax muttered, running calloused fingers over the worn controls. His gaze flicked to the small holographic image affixed to his dashboard. Mara's face, forever frozen in a half-smile. The last image captured before her pod had been caught in the gravity well of a collapsing neutron star. His sister had been the better pilot, the braver soul, the one who should have survived. The transmission crackled to life across all competing pods. Competitors of the 67th Death Track Challenge, this is your coordinator speaking. The voice belonged to a being composed primarily of light and sound waves, lacking permanent form. "We have detected a dimensional shift approaching the track. All pilots are advised to double-check temporal stabilizers and psychic dampeners. Race commences in T-minus 60 seconds. Jax's hand hovered over his equipment panel. Then, with deliberate defiance, he punched in the code to deactivate both his temporal stabilizer and psychic dampener. The AI squawked in protest. "Human contestant Jax Corbin, your safety protocols are disengaged. This is a violation of survival regulations." "Not here to survive," Jax replied, feeling the familiar hollow ache beneath his ribs. "Here to win." "Win what? Exactly?" The voice came not from his AI but from the pod that had silently glided alongside his. The pilot was visible through the transparent canopy, a being made of what appeared to be folded darkness studded with points of light, like a night sky compressed into humanoid form. The keeper of fading stars. If Jax remembered the competitor roster correctly, a race of beings who experienced time simultaneously, rather than linearly. "The answer," Jax said, not entirely sure why he was responding. "The track gives one true answer to the winner. That's the prize." "And what question burns so brightly that you would risk molecular dissolution to learn its answer?" Mira's hollow image flickered as the pod systems reallocated power for the imminent launch. Jax's fingers curled into a fist. "I need to know if she ever hated me." In the end, the keeper's form rippled with what might have been understanding or pity. Emotional states were difficult to discern in a species that had no fixed expression. Temporal truth can be crueler than uncertainty. 10 seconds to launch," the coordinator announced. Beyond their starting positions, the death track's entrance gaped like a wound in reality, a swirling maelstrom of color and distorted geometry. Impossible to predict what configurations would await them inside. The track reconfigured itself for each race, responding to the specific fears and weaknesses of its contestants. At the far edge of the starting line, a sleek pod of midnight chrome revved its engines. Through its polarized windows, Jax caught sight of Vorthan Kess, the cybernetically enhanced champion who had dominated the last 3 races. The being's skull was a network of neural enhancers and psychic amplifiers, technologies that skirted the edge of what was permissible. Vorthan's modified ocular implants swiveled, locking onto Jax with predatory focus. "The human without safeguards." Vorthan's voice slithered through the comm channel. "Bold, stupid, but entertaining." Jax switched off the channel, his attention fixed on the track entrance. The maw of churning reality seemed to pulse, almost alive, hungry for the contestants it would soon devour. 3, 2, 1. A klaxon sounded, and Jax slammed his thrusters to maximum. His pod shot forward, the abrupt acceleration pressing him back into his seat. The other racers, 22 beings representing the most daring members of their respective species, streaked alongside him, a kaleidoscope of technological achievement and evolutionary adaptation, all unified by the death-wish curiosity that drove them toward the impossible. The moment they crossed the threshold into the track, reality fractured. Jax's pod plunged into what experienced racers called the probability storm, the chaotic outer shell of the track where multiple timelines overlapped and intersected. Most competitors hugged the periphery, seeking the safest path through the temporal turbulence. Jax did the opposite. He drove straight for the churning core, where probability itself broke down and reformed into strange new configurations. Structural integrity compromised, his AI warned as the pod shuddered violently. Temporal displacement, imminent without stabilizers. Shut up and divert all power to forward shields, Jax growled, wrestling with the controls as the pod bucked and twisted through pockets of warped space-time. Around him, the storm painted impossible visions across his viewport. Mara alive and laughing. Mara dead and decaying. Mara never born at all. Without his psychic dampener, the track was already burrowing into his mind, excavating his deepest fears and regrets and projecting them into physical form. A flash of darkness to his right, Vorthan's pod, keeping pace despite the chaos. The champion's voice crackled through the emergency channel. You'll disintegrate before the first checkpoint. Human. Your species lacks the neural architecture to process temporal displacement. Never met a human, have you? Jax retorted, pushing his thrusters beyond their safety limits. His pod surged forward, diving deeper into the maelstrom. Ahead, a knot of tangled timelines split apart, revealing a momentary corridor of relative stability. Jax aimed for it, only to have his path blocked by Vorthan's larger vessel. The champion was using superior technology to predict the storm's patterns. Jax swore, veering sharply to avoid collision. The maneuver sent him spiraling through a particularly dense cluster of temporal anomalies. His vision fragmented. One moment he was a child, the next an old man, then unborn, then dead. His consciousness struggled to reassemble itself as his body experienced multiple versions of itself simultaneously. A scream cut through the deafening roar of the storm, not his own. Through the kaleidoscopic blur of his vision, Jax spotted the Keeper's pod, caught in a temporal riptide, its structure beginning to fracture along multiple probability lines. Every instinct from his years as a rescue pilot kicked in. Jax yanked his controls, diverting his trajectory toward the failing vessel. It was madness to stop in the probability storm. Movement was survival. Yet, he found himself reducing speed, extending his pod's meager shields to encompass the Keeper's craft. "What are you doing?" The Keeper's voice rippled with distortion as their timeline experienced momentary desynchronization. "Saving your ass," Jax grunted, his hands flying across the control panel to establish a tether between their vessels. "Hold on." With the Keeper's pod in tow, Jax gunned his engines again, searching for an exit from the storm's heart. His navigational display was useless amid the quantum flux, but years of flying through hazardous conditions had given him an almost preternatural sense for finding paths where none appeared to exist. There, a thread of consistent reality, barely wider than their combined vessels. Jax aimed for it, ignoring the warning lights flashing across his console. The pod screamed through the narrow corridor, reality reshaping itself around them as they passed. They burst through into what racers called the interim zone, a brief respite between the major hazards of the track. Jax's muscles ached with tension as he brought his pod to a relative halt, the Keeper's vessel still attached by the energy tether. "Why risk yourself?" the Keeper asked, their form shifting between different configurations of starlight. Jax shrugged, running diagnostics on his battered craft. Old habits. You were a guardian. Rescue pilot. Not always a successful one. His eyes drifted to Mara's image. The Keeper's pod drifted closer, its systems stabilizing. Your sister. Jax's jaw tightened. Stay out of my head. I don't need to enter your mind. Time shows me all variations of your story simultaneously. The Keeper's form contracted, concentrating into a denser configuration. In every timeline where she exists, her essence remains the same. This is true of all beings. Meaning what? If you seek to know whether hatred lived in her heart, perhaps you already know the answer. Before Jax could respond, a streak of midnight chrome shot past them. Vorthan, already advancing to the next section of the track. Several other competitors followed, their vessels showing varying degrees of damage from the probability storm. We're falling behind, Jax said, retracting the energy tether. Your pod still functional? The Keeper's craft hummed, its systems recalibrating. Sufficiently, but you have sacrificed your position to assist me. Race isn't over yet, Jax fired up his engines. And now you owe me. Indeed. Perhaps I can offer something in return. The Keeper's voice took on a strange, harmonizing quality. A temporal alliance. What does that mean? My perception, your determination. Together, we might survive what comes next. Jax hesitated, then nodded. Deal. Try to keep up. Their pods accelerated in tandem, diving deeper into the Death Track's second major hazard, the memory maze, where the probability storm had been chaotic and explosive. The memory maze was insidiously ordered, a labyrinth constructed from the contestants' own memories and regrets. Without his psychic dampener, Jax was fully exposed to its effects. The walls of the maze materialized around his pod, constructed from fragments of his past. Here was the day he'd missed Mara's graduation because of a last-minute rescue call. There was the argument they'd had over their parents' estate. Each corridor was lined with moments he'd give anything to reclaim. It's not real, he muttered to himself, even as the maze forced him to relive each painful memory with perfect fidelity. It is and isn't, the Keeper's voice came through his comms. The track builds from what exists within you. Jax navigated a sharp turn, only to find himself faced with the most devastating memory of all, the moment he'd received news of Mara's death. He saw himself again, dropping to his knees in the pilot's lounge, a holopad clattering to the floor as the announcement of the neutron star incident echoed through the room. His pod slowed, engines faltering as the memory sapped his will to continue. Jax, the Keeper's voice, seemed to come from inside his own mind now. The maze feeds on your surrender to these images. I can't go through this again. Jax's hands trembled on the controls. Then don't go through, go around. The Keeper's pod executed a series of precise maneuvers, identifying weak points in the memory architecture where reality hadn't fully crystallized. Jax followed, forcing himself to focus on the path rather than the images flickering around them. As they progressed deeper into the maze, Jax became aware of something else, echoes of the Keeper's own memories bleeding through their nascent mental connection. Flashes of stars being born and dying, civilizations rising and falling, all experienced simultaneously. And beneath it all, a grief so vast and ancient, it made his own pain seem like a single drop in an ocean. You've lost too, Jax said softly. My kind always does, the Keeper replied. To perceive all time is to witness all endings. Their pods emerged into a central chamber of the maze where several other competitors had already gathered, including Vorthan. The cybernetic champion stood outside his pod, neural enhancers glowing as he seemingly communicated directly with the track itself. The chamber was a perfect sphere, its walls projecting fragments of all contestants' memories simultaneously, a cacophony of joy and trauma. triumph, and despair. In the center hovered a pulsing orb of concentrated chronoparticles, the checkpoint that would grant access to the next section of the track. Vorthan turned as Jax and the Keeper entered, his cybernetic eyes narrowing. The mad human and the temporal wraith. How touching. Several other racers glanced their way, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain. One multi-limbed being chittered to its companion. Human without dampeners, already half insane. I'd wager. All contestants must individually interface with the checkpoint, announced the track's automated system. Prepare for psychic assessment. Jax climbed out of his pod, his legs unsteady after the intensity of the memory maze. The Keeper flowed from their vessel, their starlight form rippling with tension. Be cautious, the Keeper whispered. Vorthan has been tampering with the checkpoint protocols. How do you know? I see what he has done and will do simultaneously. The chamber's artificial gravity fluctuated as contestants approached the chronoparticle orb one by one. Each touched the pulsing light, their bodies momentarily outlined in temporal energy as the track judged their worthiness to continue. Some emerged shaken but intact. Others collapsed, their minds overloaded by the assessment. Vorthan stepped forward when his turn came, neural enhancers flaring brightly as he connected with the orb. Instead of simply touching it, his cybernetic implants seemed to interface directly with its structure. The orb's pulsations accelerated, patterns shifting. Violation, murmured the Keeper. He's altering the parameters. Before Jax could respond, Vorthan withdrew, a satisfied smile playing across his partially mechanical face. Your turn, human, he called. Unless you've finally recognized your limitations. Jax approached the orb, acutely aware of the eyes tracking his movement. Without psychic dampeners, the assessment would hit him with full force. He glanced back at the Keeper, who gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, Jax plunged his hand into the swirling chronoparticles. Instantly, his consciousness expanded beyond his body. The chamber fell away, replaced by a corridor of memories, not just his own, but Mara's. He was seeing through her eyes, feeling her thoughts, experiencing her life from within. Her childhood adoration of her big brother, her teenage resentment when he joined the rescue corps instead of staying to help with their struggling family business, her adult admiration for his courage mixed with frustration at his self-destructive tendencies. And then, the final mission. Jax gasped as he inhabited Mara's last moments. The neutron star's gravity had been miscalculated. Her pod's engines strained against the immense pull, systems failing, emergency protocols activating. Her last thoughts weren't of hatred or blame. They were of regret for arguments unresolved, for words left unsaid. And beneath it all, an abiding love that not even death could unravel. But then, something changed. The memory warped, twisted by an external force. Suddenly, he was experiencing a version where Mara's final thoughts turned bitter and accusatory. Why weren't you there to save me, Jax? You save everyone else. Why not me? Jax recoiled, trying to pull away from the orb, recognizing the falsity, but unable to shield himself from its emotional impact. This wasn't truth. It was manipulation. Through the haze of artificial memory, he felt another presence enter his mind, the Keeper, their consciousness a cool river of stars flowing through his inflamed thoughts. Vorthan! The Keeper's voice echoed in his mind. He's corrupted the assessment. Fight it, Jax. With the Keeper's support, Jax pushed back against the false memories, struggling to separate truth from manipulation. The orb pulsed violently, caught between competing influences. Finally, with a surge of mental energy, Jax broke free, staggering backward as his consciousness snapped back into his physical form. He fell to his knees, gasping for breath. The other contestants stared in stunned silence. No unprotected human had ever survived direct interface with a chronoparticle assessment. "Impossible!" Vorthan hissed, his cybernetic implants glowing with barely contained rage. The Keeper moved to Jax's side, their starlight form offering silent support as he struggled to his feet. "Checkpoint cleared," announced the track system. "Final stage access granted to all remaining contestants." Jax stumbled back to his pod, his mind reeling from the experience. As he strapped himself in, he turned to find the Keeper already beside him. "He'll try to stop us again," the Keeper said. "More directly next time." "Let him try." Jax initialized his engines, a new determination hardening his features. "I've seen enough to know what I'm fighting for now." The Keeper's form brightened. "The answer you sought?" "No." Jax's eyes fixed on the pathway opening before them, the entrance to the track's final and most lethal challenge. "Something better. The truth." The pod surged forward, diving into the heart of tomorrow's graveyard. If the memory maze had been constructed from the past, tomorrow's graveyard was built from futures, specifically, the futures in which each contestant met their demise. The moment Jax's pod entered the space, he found himself surrounded by holographic projections of his own death in countless variations. Here he was, crushed by gravitational forces. There, his body dissolved into component atoms by a temporal flux. In another projection, his mind shattered under psychic assault. Each death seemed more horrific than the last, each presented with perfect sensory fidelity. The track was showing him exactly what awaited if he made the wrong choice. Most contestants hugged the outermost path, where fewer death projections clustered. Vorthan's midnight pod was already well ahead, his enhanced systems allowing him to plot the safest course through the grim gallery. Jax, however, aimed his vessel directly toward the center, where the highest concentration of death holograms swirled in a macabre vortex. "What are you doing?" The Keeper's alarmed voice came through the comm. "Something stupid," Jax replied, increasing speed. "The track shows us where we'll die if we go wrong, right?" "Yes, but—" "So the place with the most deaths is the place everyone avoids, which means it's the place no one has ever gone." Jax's hands were steady on the controls now, his mind cleared by a strange, fatalistic clarity. The impossible path. The Keeper's vessel followed, though Jax could sense their trepidation even through the comm static. "Your species' capacity for terminal optimism is remarkable. We call it having nothing left to lose." Jax's pod screamed toward the heart of the death projections, systems redlining as reality itself seemed to buckle around them. Ahead, he could see the finish line, a tear in the fabric of the universe, a direct passage back to normal space. Vorthan's pod was approaching it from a wider, safer angle, but Jax's reckless trajectory would put him there first, if he survived. As they penetrated deeper into the swarm of death holograms, something strange happened. Instead of increasing, the projections began to flicker and fade. The impossible path was working. They were outrunning probability itself. "Jax," the Keeper's voice took on an urgent tone. "Vorthan is launching a psychic assault. He's using the track's architecture to amplify it." Before Jax could respond, his mind erupted in agony. Vorthan's attack bypassed all natural defenses, driving straight into his deepest vulnerabilities. Once again, he was drowning in false memories of Mara's hatred and accusation, but amplified 1,000-fold. His pod began to drift off course, heading toward a particularly dense cluster of death projections that were solidifying into reality as his concentration faltered. "Fight it," the Keeper urged, their own consciousness stretching toward his. "The memories are false. He cannot touch the truth of what you saw in the assessment." But Vorthan's attack was too powerful, his cybernetic enhancements channeling the track's own energy against Jax. The false memories multiplied, overwhelming his sense of what was real. His sister's face twisted with hatred in thousands of variations, each more convincing than the last. "I can't!" Jax gasped, his pod spiraling toward certain destruction. What happened next would later be debated by xenobiologists and temporal theorists across 17 star systems. The Keeper of Fading Stars, rather than abandoning Jax to his fate, initiated a profound and unprecedented connection. Their consciousness, which experienced all time simultaneously, fully merged with Jax's linear human perception. In an instant, Jax's mind expanded beyond its biological constraints. He saw everything the Keeper saw: the birth and death of stars, the rise and fall of civilizations, the endless cycle of creation and destruction that constituted the universe's heartbeat. And within that vast tapestry, he saw the truth of his connection to Mera, not as a frozen moment of failure, but as an enduring thread in the cosmic weave. The sensory overload should have destroyed his human mind. Instead, it crystallized his purpose. With perfect clarity, he saw the path through tomorrow's graveyard, not around the death projections, but through them, not avoiding fate, but embracing all possible futures simultaneously. His pod surged forward, guided by a hybrid consciousness that existed both in linear time and beyond it. Vorthan's psychic assault shattered against this new awareness, unable to find purchase in a mind that now perceived all false constructs for what they were. The finish line loomed ahead, the tear in reality that would return them to normal space. Vorthan's pod was still approaching from the side, its systems pushing to maximum capacity. In the final seconds, Jax felt the Keeper's consciousness begin to withdraw from his. "What are you doing?" he asked, suddenly afraid of losing this expanded perception. "Giving you back to yourself," the Keeper replied, their mental voice tinged with both sadness and joy. "Some journeys must be completed alone. But we're almost there, together. And we will finish together. But you must cross as Jax Corbin, not as something in between." The Keeper's consciousness receded further, leaving only a lingering warmth where their minds had touched. With a final surge of speed, their pods crossed the finish line in perfect synchronicity, passing through the tear in reality and emerging back into normal space. Reality snapped back into focus with jarring abruptness. Jax's pod materialized above the arena's landing platform, systems automatically engaging landing protocols. Beside him, the Keeper's vessel shimmered into existence, its structure subtly altered by their shared experience in the track. The arena erupted in chaos. Spectators of 1,000 species roared, chirped, and pulsed with excitement. The massive chronometer above the finish line displayed an impossible number: 30.0 seconds. The previous record had been 4.7 minutes, set by Vorthan 2 races prior. The coordinator's voice boomed across the arena. "Unprecedented! The Death Track records human contestant Jax Corbin and the Keeper of Fading Stars as a single entity. Finishing time 30.0 seconds. A new record by an extraordinary margin." Vorthan's pod landed moments later, its midnight chrome surface scorched by temporal energies. The cybernetic champion emerged, neural enhancers flickering with barely contained fury. "Illegal!" he shouted, striding toward the officiating council. "They merged consciousness! The human had no protections. Both should be disqualified." The head official, a being composed of pure crystalline logic, raised an appendage for silence. "The rules state that contestants must begin as individuals. There is no prohibition against cooperation or temporary merging during the race. The finish stands." Jax climbed out of his pod on unsteady legs, his mind still adjusting to its return to linear perception. The Keeper flowed from their vessel, their starlight form subtly synchronized with Jax's movements, an echo of their shared consciousness. "The track recognizes you as victor," the official announced, approaching Jax and the Keeper. "As tradition dictates, you may ask one question of the track, and it will provide the one true answer." Jax stood silent for a long moment. The question that had driven him to enter the race, to risk his life and sanity, suddenly seemed small compared to what he had experienced. Through the Keeper's perception, he had seen the truth of Mara's feelings without needing confirmation. He turned to the Keeper. "You helped me find my answer without asking the track. I forfeit my question to you." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. No victor had ever given away their question. The Keeper's form pulsed with surprise. "Are you certain? This is why you came." "I already know what I needed to know." Jax smiled, the expression unfamiliar after so long. "Ask your question. Make it count." The Keeper seemed to consider for a moment, their form shifting through various configurations of starlight. Finally, they addressed the official. "My question is this. Will the cycle of universal collapse and rebirth ever produce a reality where consciousness persists from one iteration to the next?" The official interfaced with the track, their crystalline form resonating as information flowed through them. After several seconds, they spoke. "Yes, it has already begun with your connection to the human. What you shared will echo through subsequent universal iterations." The Keeper's form flared brightly, then stabilized. "Thank you," they said simply. As the ceremony concluded and the spectators began to disperse, Jax found himself standing beside his pod, suddenly uncertain of what came next. The race that had consumed his purpose was over. The grief that had driven him was not gone, but transformed into something he could carry without being crushed beneath it. The Keeper approached, their form now maintaining a configuration that subtly mirrored Jax's own. "What will you do now, Jax Corbin?" Jax's eyes drifted to the memorial wall that stood at the edge of the arena, a massive obsidian monolith inscribed with the names of all who had perished on the death track. "First, I have something to add to that wall." They walked together to the memorial. Though Mara had not died on the track, Jax felt it was fitting that her name should be there, not as a mark of failure, but as a testament to the love that had ultimately saved him. The Keeper produced a small tool of concentrated starlight, offering it to Jax. With steady hands, he inscribed Mara Corbin into the obsidian surface. Not an end, but a beginning. "And after this?" the Keeper asked. Jax stepped back, studying the name now etched permanently among the stars. "I don't know. For the first time in years, I don't have my course plotted to the last coordinate. Perhaps that is as it should be." The Keeper's form shifted slightly, stars rearranging themselves into a pattern that suggested a smile. Linear beings fixate too much on destinations. It is the journey that shapes you, says the being who experiences all time at once. Precisely why I value the perspective of those who don't. They stood in comfortable silence, the bustle of the arena continuing around them. Other racers were already preparing for the next challenge, their vessels being reconfigured and enhanced. The eternal cycle of competition continued. "There's a binary star system in the Viridian Quadrant," Jax said finally. "Mara always wanted to see it. Said the light from two suns rising together created colors that couldn't exist anywhere else in the universe." "I know this system," the Keeper replied. "Your sister was correct about the colors." "My pod needs repairs. But it could make the journey." Jax hesitated, then added, "It seats two, technically, though I've never carried a passenger made of starlight before." The Keeper's form brightened. "I have never experienced such a journey from a linear perspective. It would be educational." Jax laughed, a rusty sound, but genuine. "Educational, sure, let's call it that." As they walked back toward the landing platforms, the death track faded behind them, its purpose fulfilled for another cycle. Ahead lay not answers, but possibilities, a universe of moments waiting to be experienced, one after another, in proper sequence. For the first time since losing Mara, Jax found himself looking forward rather than back. The grief would always be there, a shadow that gave depth to every experience. But now, it walked beside him, rather than driving him forward, and he was no longer alone on the journey. The pod would need significant modifications to accommodate a passenger composed of starlight and temporal energy. The navigation charts would require updating for the journey to the Viridian Quadrant. There were 1,000 details to consider, 1,000 problems to solve. Jax Corbin smiled. He had always been good at solving problems. As they reached his battered vessel, the keeper paused, their form shifting to observe the distant stars, visible through the arena's transparent dome. You humans have a curious saying about time healing all wounds. Having experienced all time simultaneously, I can tell you this is not precisely accurate. No? Jax ran his hand along the pod's scarred hull, already mentally calculating the repairs needed. Time doesn't heal wounds, the keeper said. It transforms them into something you can carry. The wound becomes part of your story, rather than its end. Jax nodded, looking up at the stars that had witnessed both his failures and his triumphs. Somewhere among them was the Viridian system, with its impossible colors, waiting to be witnessed. Then let's go add to our stories. The keeper's form rippled in what might have been laughter. Indeed, the race is over, the journey continues. Together, they began preparations for departure, leaving the death track and its questions behind. What lay ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, uncertainty felt like freedom rather than fear. After all, as Jax now understood, every ending was simply the beginning of something new. Even in a universe of inevitable conclusions, hope remained the one constant that transcended all timelines.